I was growing up in a broken home. I started partying. I began to experiment with drugs. As I got older, I did more drugs and more alcohol. Suicide for the first time. She was an alcoholic. She was a drug addict, verbally abusive. I was always trying to find something to fill the void that was inside of me. So at a young childhood, I was growing up in a broken home. My mom and my dad, they got divorced while I was at an early age. At that point, my mom actually ran off with me to Tennessee, pretty much kidnapped me, and took some time for my dad and my brother to find me. But when they did, I was able to move back home. Around that same time, my dad got remarried. He was getting really low income wages at the time. So we were, I would say, kind of close to poverty, but we were doing okay. Then my dad's business as an insurance sales really went up. And so at that point, usually around, I believe it was around 5th grade, that I went into a private school. I started partying, started hanging out with the wrong crowd, started to drink quite often. I think my earliest point that I was drinking, I was 12 years old. As I turned into a teenager, I began to experiment with drugs, did more alcohol. As I got older, I did more drugs, more alcohol, to a point where I was just trying to fill a void. My mom, we didn't have a great relationship. She was an alcoholic, she was a drug addict, she was very verbally abusive. And so it was hard growing up not really having a mother figure in my life. My dad, being a single dad, remarried, he really did the best I think that he could have. And so I was always trying to find something to fill the void that was inside of me. It was with my first girlfriend that during a breakup that I attempted suicide for the first time. I had a belt around my neck, and I was 16 at the time. And I just remember clasping the belt around my neck, and then everything went black. It was about 30 minutes later that I woke up on the ground with the belt across the room, and I have no clue what happened from there. After many more years of just partying and doing drugs, primarily marijuana, cocaine, ecstasy, I got into another relationship. And this relationship went south after a couple years, and it was when I attempted suicide for the second time. During that breakup, I drank half a fifth of Evan Williams whiskey and tried to take as many Sudafed pills as I could one night. I passed out and ended up getting woke up by a friend at 8 o'clock the next morning to what appeared to be a war zone in my backyard, where apparently I went off. In that same relationship, I ended up overdosing one night on cocaine and ended up waking up in somebody's bathroom. Apparently I had vomited blood all evening. I was really at the lowest point of my life, is what it felt like. I felt like I'd actually hit rock bottom. Fast forwarding, I met my wife. Right before we got married, I had gotten pulled over for a DUI. And that night I blew a .225. And it was a long night of partying and drinking. And I had coke on me in my truck. I had pills on me. They pulled me over for doing 85 miles an hour down Perkins Road. They took me out of my truck. I pretty much didn't do any sobriety tests. I just handed them my wrist and said, go ahead and bring me where we're going. And they did, and they brought me downtown. You'd have thought that would have been a wake-up call for me to change what I was doing. I continued to party, continued to drink, continued to do drugs. I was committing adultery in the background, and my wife really had no idea about that till later. She actually, during all of the parties and whatnot, the reason that she began reading her Bible again was because she was looking for a reason to divorce me. and she wanted to have God's approval, if you would. And I had no idea. I didn't find out until years later that that was the case. I finally got to a point in my life where I remember sitting outside, drunk and high, and I just asked God to give me the want to want Him. Because I was tired of feeling the void. I was tired of feeling the hurt and the pain. And I saw all these people with these changed lives and just living a life of peace and happiness. And I wanted the want, but I still couldn't give up this old lifestyle. It seemed like it just wasn't worth it to me because I had no idea what was on the other side of the fence. And then finally, one night I was drunk, and my son Hayes was in the kitchen with me. And he was actually blowing this grunt call for deer in the kitchen. And I was sitting there looking at him, and it's almost like I could feel the Spirit of God in his eyes looking into me. And as I was looking at Hayes, he was just looking back at me, and he had this level of, like, are you proud of me? Like, do you love me? Do you see me here? And I looked into his eyes, and it blew me away because I kind of saw myself as a young age. And the last thing I wanted were my kids to go through what I went through. And it was at that point that I was like, you know what? I'm done. And then me and Rachel, it was around Christmas, we actually attended our first service at Healing Place Church off Highland. And I remember walking in and feeling something different in the atmosphere, but I couldn't really put my finger on what it was. And I just remember being in service, and then just this overwhelming presence of peace and love and acceptance. For even through all of the stuff that I did, there was this level of acceptance and love that I've never felt before, and it was overwhelming. I mean, I just remember praying and I just broke down crying, and it was during worship. And I kind of hid it because, you know, as men we're supposed to be strong, but I couldn't hide it as well as I thought I could. And it was at that point in time that I told God, all right, I'm going to surrender it all. I'm done going halfway on it. We're going to go all the way. After that church service, I remember me and Rachel talking, and that's when we decided to make Healing Place our church. And so it was at that point that I changed my life completely over. Started getting involved some down at Highland. We did some outreaches. I actually went to a Hams for Fams in 2014 for the first time, and actually got hooked up with Pastor Terry Olivier, and he got me involved in a small group that pretty much changed my life. And it was in that small group that I actually met a lot of the friends that I have today, one of them being Pastor Ryan. Fast forward a couple years, Pastor Ryan had asked me and Rachel if we wanted to attend Denham. Well, we were kind of hard-bent on wanting to come to Denham because Highland was our church. Well, me and her one day when nobody was here, we drove up here one evening, and we pulled up in the parking lot, and we just began crying. It was like, okay, this is our church. And little did I know that Pastor Ryan was going to ask us to lead the greet team here at the church. I never assumed myself to be a leader of any sort. I just kind of went my own direction. I never thought it would be, you know, a position of leadership. And I still feel to this day like I'm not equipped to do any of these things. But we felt God was calling us here. Now that it's been a couple years since we've been established here at Denham, being able to work with our greet team is amazing. We have some awesome people that serve with us. Their friendship, their devotion to God, devotion to their, God's house. Seeing our kids be so involved and eager to come not only back to church, but to all their small group. It excites me to know that one day that my kids will be here praying over everything just like we do. And so I couldn't be happier to be in a place where not only loved by God, accepted by God, but loved and accepted by His people. And it's more or less not just a church, but a family. I'm Matt Tibbetts, and this is my testimony.